Good evening and welcome. I'm Ellen Keith, Chicago Collections Consortium Board Chair and Director of Research and Access and Chief Librarian at the Chicago History Museum. I am really honored this evening to welcome Illinois Secretary of State Alexi Giannoulias and Amy Williams, Assistant General Counsel, Office of the Illinois Secretary of State. If you're joining us for the first time tonight, Chicago Collections Consortium is a consortium of libraries, museums, and cultural organizations, all working together for the preservation and promotion of Chicago's history and culture. We share our collections through our Explore portal, which provides free and open access to members' archival collections. We would like to begin our program with Chicago Collections Consortium's Land Acknowledgement Statement, which reads, Chicago Collections Consortium acknowledges and is grateful for the Native peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago, and for the diverse Indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago's outdoor spaces, we invite you to join in offering respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous peoples that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. I would like to thank CCC's donors, shown here, whose generous support allows us to offer unique free programming like this one being offered tonight, in addition to supporting our Explore Chicago Collections portal. We invite you to check out CCC's website to see a complete listing of upcoming programming. Tonight, we are pleased to have the opportunity to learn more about the Secretary of State and his office's commitment to libraries and their work in the fight against book banning. Our discussion will begin with Secretary Giannoulias and will follow with Amy Williams. Please note we hope to have time for questions following each of the discussions, and they can be directed to the Q&A. Let us begin with Secretary Giannoulias. As many of you know, in 2006, Giannoulias was elected Illinois State Treasurer and became the youngest state treasurer in the nation at age 30. After leaving the treasurer's office in 2011, Giannoulias was appointed as chairman of the Illinois Community College System. He also became senior director at BNY Mellon Wealth Management and taught at CCC founding member Northwestern University. Secretary Giannoulias graduated cum laude from Boston University with a degree in economics and earned a law degree from Tulane University School of Law. Welcome, Secretary Giannoulias.
Well, thank you for having me. Hopefully, everyone can hear me and see me okay. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, and I want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for any questions or any feedback or any thoughts. And I will also tell you that you guys are going to hear from Amy Williams, who's a lot brighter and a lot cooler than I am. So she's really terrific. She's a really important part of our team. She's a true believer, and she represents the very best of what it means to be a public servant. So I want to thank all of you for everything that you guys do. A couple notes before I, open up to questions. And number one, I'm a very proud Chicagoan. I grew up in the city on the north side of Chicago. My family and I live in Old Town, so I'm a city guy. I need to be in the city. I love the city. The city of Chicago is very important to me. I live right down the street from the Chicago Historical Museum, Chicago History Museum, and my girls love it. We love it. So thank you for all that you guys do for our city. I also had some time to serve on the Chicago Public Library Board, which did really, really outstanding work for so many communities. And I loved being on the Chicago Public Library Board. The fact that every single neighborhood in Chicago has its own library, to me, I think is incredible. It's something that's very special. And these libraries are, safe havens for so many kids, for so many adults. I grew up the son of two immigrants who both came to this country for a better life separately. They met here, and going to the Edgewater Library on Broadway and Elmdale was such a big part of how we grew up. And, as immigrants, my parents thought all they really cared about, not all they cared about, was they wanted to make sure that their kids were educated. Education was everything. Getting the chance to go to high school and go to college was a huge deal. So books in our libraries were where we grew up. It's where we spent time. It's where we developed a love for knowledge, where we developed an appreciation for different worldviews, for different perspectives. We're able to understand different thoughts, different passions, different interests, and nothing will ever ever replace that feeling of, especially as a little kid, and I was the youngest of three boys, having my own book that was mine, and it was my world. And whether it was a week or 2 weeks or whatever, that was my world. And the work that our libraries do is incredible, and the work that our librarians do is heroic. That's why, one of the best parts of being Secretary of State is being the state librarian. So I was really excited about that role when I was running, and when I was fortunate enough to get elected. So imagine my surprise when, upon taking office, instead of figuring out ways to do more for our libraries or help our libraries even more, make sure we fight for resources, or talking to kids about the importance of reading, we were dealt with this book ban, which book bans are always horrible, but to be dealing with this in the year 2023 was very disheartening. And then to travel the state and hear from librarians across the state who've never dealt with this level of threats, of intimidation, of threats of violence, of bomb threats, of being forced to close their doors, really, really, really made me sad. And I'm a little old school in that I don't believe public officials have time to get sad. They have to take action. So I'm very proud of the fact that we sat down and said, okay, we need to be proactive. We can't be on the defense when it comes to this preposterous idea that one or two individuals can determine the circulation of a book for an entire community. So we fought back. We were proactive, and we passed our first in the nation bill that bans book bans. And you will not receive state funding if your library bans books. We thought that was important, not just for the freedom of education, the freedom to read, the freedom to learn, but also for the future of our democracy. So I could not be more proud of our bill. I could not be more proud of it becoming law. And I think if we had more states sort of take up this mantle, which we're starting to see take place, I think we can fight back on this. So, like I said, I want to make sure I make this conversation and open up to questions, but I can't tell you how much respect and admiration and love I have for our librarians and library staff, and all the folks who care about our city's culture and civic education, and making sure that our kids are educated and especially with all the problems in the world, have a place where they can learn and grow mentally and emotionally. So with that, I want to open up to questions or thoughts or ideas or anything we could be doing in the office. There's a few folks, I think, from our team on here too. Greg McCormick, the director of libraries, I see on there, and some others. So and Dave Jones, who's I think that's Dave Jones, who's the director of archives for the state of Illinois. So thank you very much, and I'd love to take any questions or thoughts you have.
Wonderful. And I just thank you for calling librarians heroic. It's been rough on them. And I speak from a position of privilege where I'm in a special library and I'm not facing what my fellow public librarians are facing. So I know we'll have some Q&A, but we also have some questions we wanted to start with. What can the average person do to ensure that book banning doesn't continue? Is there any power the individual has?
Yeah, there's a lot. And I think number one, getting even more engaged. We've also seen subsequent to our bill passing, this is not an issue that I think is that is very controversial or most people will fundamentally agree that book banning is bad, right? They're against it, but you have the loud sort of extreme voices which are taking over this topic, which are scaring parents, scaring elected officials, scaring librarians, and they are the loudest and they're the most active. So they're the ones that are, making phone calls, that are joining library boards, that are scaring elected officials with false information. So I would just say, number one, run for library board. Number two, pay attention to who's on the library board. Number three, pay attention to your elected officials and what they're doing. So, and work hard to support your librarians. Give them a hug. Let them know how grateful you are. Let them know how appreciative you are of everything they're doing. And educate people who may either be on the fence or don't really understand the dangers of book bans. I think, I try to be apolitical, and I don't want to be political, especially here in front of this group. But the truth of the matter is, and I can't believe this has become political, but a lot of Republicans are pushing this narrative that this is about child pornography, or that Alexi Giannoulias is a pedophile that wants your kid to read. That's not what this is at all. This is about, number one, trusting librarians to determine what books should be and should not be in circulation. This is not us telling anyone what books they have to read or what books have to be in a library. What we're saying is do what always has been done, which is allow these librarians, who, by the way, have masters of information science, who have master's degrees in library science, to determine what books belong in circulation. And as I mentioned earlier, it can't be up to one or two extreme parents to determine what books an entire community reads. Last point I'll say in this is educating other parents on what this really means. And as I said in front of the United States Judiciary Committee when we testified on this issue, I've got 3 young daughters at home. And of course, there are certain books that my wife and I don't feel are age appropriate for them. But I could never fathom a world where I tell another family what books kids should and should not be reading. That goes against what our country's all about. And it's also fundamentally against what it means to educate our youth, and that's to teach them to think for themselves.
We have a great question that came in the Q&A. What are some things that special, private, or other libraries that are more insulated can do to support our colleagues who face these challenges?
I would use, that's a great point. I would, number one, reach out to librarians, let them know that you support them. I mean, the emotional support of a phone call, an email, letting them know we're doing a visit to the library really goes a long way. And then to educate, again, people who understand this topic to fight on their behalf or to be engaged in those communities is huge. Again, we're allowing a loud few to really move the needle on an issue which should be offensive to everyone.
And you spoke about having to be proactive when you came into office. When did you become aware that the topic of book banning needed protection under the law? And what other issues are your administration focused on?
We noticed it during the transition. The book banning stuff started to really get sort of drummed up. And at first I was like, okay, well, maybe, what is this all about? Then we started seeing the books that they were talking about. Books that were being banned were To Kill a Mockingbird of Mice and Men, Kite Runner, 1984. So then you start saying, okay, something deeper is going on. And they're targeting LGBTQ plus issues. They're targeting African-American authors and issues that are important to certain communities. So we started noticing the danger, and we decided to go full steam ahead. We've worked on a number of issues within the office, modernization being, the biggest one. We're trying to change the way that our vehicles and driver services operate. A complete modernization and technological overhaul of the office. We have a brand new website. We're going to be announcing electronic notary public for the first time, electronic car titles. We moved to an appointment-only system for our vehicle and driver services. So we're doing a lot of things that I promised, but moving that technology initiative forward has been hard, but I'm very proud of the progress we've made. We're also trying to let people know all the work that the Secretary of State's office does. We are the largest office in the country. Not only do we see drivers of vehicle services, not only are we the state librarian, we're also in charge of the organ tissue donor program with 7.5 million donors on our list. We also have a securities division where we go after white collar criminals and corporate criminals. We have the state archives. We have the index department. We're in charge of business services. So anyone that wants to start a business or grow a business in the state of Illinois comes through our office. So we do a lot. I'm very proud of the team that we have, and the impact that we've had on the technology has already been tangible, and I'm very excited about the future. In addition to all that, we've been very, very relentlessly aggressive as far as our legislative agenda. You know, our banning on books is, you know, the first in the nation. We're also the first in the nation to outlaw law enforcement from using automatic license plate readers to track women who come into Illinois for abortions. We also passed a law to make it illegal to Zoom while people are driving. We also got rid of the temporary driver's license for undocumented drivers, which makes our seats makes our seats safer. So we've had a lot of legislative wins too. So we've been pretty tireless the first 10 months in office here.
It's been fantastic. You've talked a little bit about, you know, growing up here and the role that libraries played in your life. So the role that libraries are playing continues to change. You know, there are social workers on staff. There are, you know, public librarians have to be trained to administer Narcan. What resources is the state of Illinois offering to help support library workers in this sort of new era?
Great point. There's a really incredible article about a month ago about, you know, our libraries have become our librarians have become the mentors, the psychiatrists, the teachers, the doctors of some of these communities. And I couldn't agree more with that. So we work hard on with our library grants to find ways to help our libraries with technology, with infrastructure, with reading materials. And about 2 weeks ago, we announced for the first time ever that we would help support libraries that are dealing with bomb threats by giving out grants to the Illinois Library Association. So we are working hard to make sure we give grants out, and we're also going to make an effort along with the General Assembly and the Governor's Office to continue to bring more resources to our libraries and to our librarians, especially given all the work that's not necessarily on the resume or the job description of our librarians.
Other duties as assigned.
Right, as assigned.
So I know you've touched on this a little, but what makes Illinois stand out as being such a leader for libraries and so supportive of librarians?
I think, again, it starts with CPL. I mean, I think the Chicago Public Libraries, and I've traveled to other cities and other states, we are very lucky. Our libraries are extraordinary. And the city of Chicago, to their credit's given them a lot of resources and attention to our libraries. And then from there, I think having a General Assembly and a governor and a library sort of infrastructure that understands what they do for every single community has been huge. And I will tell you, we fought and clawed to get our bill sort of worked on, but when we had it ready, you know, it flew through the House, it flew through the Senate. We had a governor that was ready to sign it on day one. So, you know, and look, Chicago and Illinois definitely has its challenges, don't get me wrong. 100% every city does. But in so many respects, we're really lucky to live in this state that cares for others, that's willing to fight for our librarians. And I think sometimes we're a little insulated in Chicago because a lot of us think the same way, and we don't see these book bans as prominent. But I'm telling you, go to some of these collar counties, go to central and southern Illinois, and it's vicious. It's vicious if you're a kid that looks different or feels different and is looking for, you know, a perspective or a worldview that reflects how they feel. It's really hard for a lot of our kids. It's really hard for a lot of our librarians. So add to that the mental health issues and the isolation that so many of our youth are facing. We should be fighting for our librarians tooth and nail, and I just think that our leaders in Illinois get that.
Definitely. How has your personal life and your political life prepared you for this role as Secretary of State?
That's a great question. Personal life, you know, having two older brothers, as I mentioned, who taught me to be very competitive, having two parents who are my heroes, who again had that immigrant mentality. And I just feel like they sacrificed and struggled so much for me and my brothers. I felt compelled to do more with my life, and I've always believed in public service and giving back and being a part of a larger community. And professional life, I think, being state treasurer, having worked on campaigns of some people that I have a lot of respect for, so having that political background has been helpful, but also working in the private sector, spending time running a business, trying to make payroll, but also, some of my work that I do that was neither political nor did I get paid for it, like being on the library board, like being the chair of the Illinois Community Colleges. It gave me a really great perspective on what resources are out there for people who may not, have money to do the things I think they need to do. I mean, our community colleges are absolutely unbelievable here in Illinois. They're a hidden gem, whether it's for vocational training, whether it's for helping kids figure out what direction to go to before they go to a four-year university. So some of my most fulfilling work was on the Chicago Public Library and being chairman of the Illinois Community Colleges for 4 years.
What are you currently reading, and what could you recommend?
So that's a great question. So I'm a little I don't want to say weird, but I only read nonfiction. I can't remember the last time I read a fiction novel, which is not to say I judge people who do or it's not more exciting. I just feel like there's so many interesting stories and people out there in the world. So right now I'm reading a book on Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon and the 1968 campaign. I finished, and my wife bought me the Walter Isaacson book on I love biographies on Elon Musk. I also have the biography on Sam Bankman-Fried, which is written by an author that I really like. So it's been the problem is I have 3 young kids and a demanding job, so it's not always easy to read anything. But I love reading. I wish I had more time.
Well, thank you so much. We've been this has been such a treat to have you here. Just seeing as anything else before we turn it over to Amy Williams.
If you guys have more questions for me, I'll take them. But again, this is not a political position for me to say that we need to take care of our library. It should be a no-brainer for everyone. And I see the kids that come into our libraries, and I see the work that our librarians do to really teach them about literature, to teach them about learning, to guide them, to increase their worldview, especially again with all the craziness that's going on in the world. I am so grateful for all the work that you guys do, fighting for our communities and fighting for our democracy and fighting for our future. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Support your local librarian. Get out there, run for office, show up to a library board meeting, go online and tell people why this fight is so important. But I'm honored to be here with all of you, and I look forward to a long-lasting relationship.
Thank you so much, Secretary Giannoulias. I mean, and Illinois is a great state to be a librarian in. It's really special.
I agree, and I've got 3 kids that are screaming for me, but I'm going to try and listen to Amy for a few minutes here.
Okay.
Make sure she doesn't say anything mean about me.
Thank you.
That's a lot of pressure, boss. Not the easiest guy. Not the easiest guy in the world to follow, but this is my favorite topic, so I'm going to give it a shot. But I think the secretary was pretty modest, actually, about the fight we had to pass this bill. Fortunately, we do live in Illinois, where this bill did very easily pass. Unfortunately, it was not as bipartisan as we would have hoped, which came as a great surprise to me, too, Mr. Secretary, because I don't consider there to be anything controversial about a book or certainly a library. But over the weekend, I spent time with my 10-year-old niece and my 5-year-old nephew, and they have heard me talk about this bill quite a bit. And it's interesting to hear their perspective on it. My niece is already seeing some of her favorite titles and authors show up on banned book lists in other states. And she finds it very shocking and very demoralizing. And I think my great hope from this bill is that someday when she is old enough to have children of her own, that a bill like this is no longer necessary. That maybe by drawing the line in the sand in Illinois as early and forcefully as I think we have, we are setting the tone, and I hope others will follow. My 5-year-old nephew is a little bit more precocious than that, and I think he may be using this as a power play with his school librarian. He tells me that he knows that that nobody is allowed to tell him that he can't check out whatever book he wants to in the grade school library. So they're invested in this. This is an issue that impacts all of us, and it impacts our children mostly. And we can all very clearly see what types of books are being targeted. And I worry about places where we are trying to erase certain stories, certain people from our history and from our future. So the Secretary gave you a great background on the bill and how and why we got here, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to actually enforce this and implement it in the state of Illinois. Our first order of business is to adopt administrative rules, which we will do next month. And those rules are they're pretty clear. We just put the statute into the administrative rules, particularly in every section that deals with any grant funding from the state library. It just reaffirms the commitment that we made in the bill. Our library team has also drafted a certification, which will go with every grant application package and will require the grant applicant to certify that they have either adopted the American Library Association's Bill of Rights or that they have a comparable version of their own. That certification will be made under penalty of perjury and must accompany every grant application that the library receives. I think that's the easy part. We received 16 comments on our rulemaking. And of course, by state law, we have to respond to each of those comments during the comment period. They were overwhelmingly positive. I have never had an administrative rule where I just had to write thank you notes to the commenters and not explain or justify our position. It was very affirming during the legislative process and during this rulemaking to hear so much support from the librarians, from teachers, from parents, from the communities that are most impacted by this, to know that we're doing the right thing and that they're grateful for this. The more difficult part may be enforcing this, and I hope that we don't have to do this very often. Because if we have to enforce this, it's going to mean that a library does not have the certification that they promised us they have. But we will be ready and willing to take action if that is the case. So they will have made their certification. They are bound by state statute. If at some point down the road they have received the grant from our library, and we later find out that they are in the practice of banning books, and with the support of our librarians, I don't think they'll be able to keep it a secret. I have a feeling that we will hear that from the communities. We have the Grant Recovery Act. And we can proceed to an administrative hearing and recover the grant funds that have already been paid to that library. And I don't anticipate this being a widespread problem. I think our librarians, our library districts, our library boards are on board with this. I think that they appreciate the cover that we're giving them to resist the book challenges. It is an option at our disposal and something I think that we should have serious conversations about in the event that this does happen, to reaffirm our position on this and to put the meaning behind this bill. So the bill goes into effect on January 1st of this coming year, and any grant applications received on or after January 1st will have that required certification attached to them. And we, like I said, we have heard overwhelming support. There may be some collar counties and smaller communities downstate Illinois where this is a problem. But like the Secretary said, I think that this is a very small, very loud minority. I don't think that this is the sentiment of most voters. I don't think this is the sentiment of most people generally. When they look at what books are being banned, I think people are very often surprised to see some of their favorite books on the banned list. I'm actually very proud that most of my favorite books have at one point been challenged. I think that that is a good thing. And I'm also very fearful that the people that are challenging these books have never read these books. If they had read these books, they would see that the book is not about the one or two sentences that they find so terribly objectionable. I think that we have to be very proactive in enforcing this. And I think that the certification that Greg McCormick and his staff have put together is the best way to do it. It's right there in front of the grant application. It is very clear that it's made under penalty of perjury. And we've been very aggressive about talking about this bill, presenting this bill. This bill will come as no surprise to any librarian that applies for a grant application after January 1st. I'm happy to answer any questions about the administrative rules or the enforcement of the bill, or any of the nitty-gritty that I can clarify for anybody.
I also have to interject because I just went straight into hearing. I was so interested in hearing what Amy was going to say. I didn't introduce her. So I'm just going to go back for a moment. So just so you all know, Amy Williams has been Assistant General Counsel with the Office of the Illinois Secretary of State for 10 years. In that role, Amy provides legal guidance and drafts legislation for several departments, including the Illinois State Library. Amy has been practicing law for 17 years after graduating cum laude from Northern Illinois University College of Law in 2006. And my apologies, Amy,
That's
I was
okay.
just so
Thank
interested
you.
in all the nitty gritty, but
if there's any questions about the nitty gritty or the policy or how we're going to enforce this, I'm happy to answer it. This bill is definitely the crowning achievement of my professional career so far. And I've been doing this for 10 years, and this is the first bill that my mom has ever slipped in support of. So that was a big day for the Williams family.
it's excellent.
My mom slips in support of bills that she just even thinks I may have something to do with.
I like it. She's not as picky as my mom.
If I can add before I jump off, I mentioned Greg McCormick and Dave Jones. I think Eileen Kim is on the phone, but and Amy Williams. I'm not just saying it because they're part of our team, but I think sometimes having your name on the door, being the Secretary of State, or being the mayor, or being the alderman, or being the state rep, we get a lot of attention and congratulatory sort of sentiments when things go well. But the truth of the matter is, if not for the team, and if not for people who are aligned with the vision of fighting for librarians and fighting for people who don't always have a voice for them, and then having the capability and the intelligence to do so, we wouldn't be able to get this stuff done. And Amy and all the others I mentioned probably could be making, not probably, for sure could be making more money and doing other things, but they are hardworking and committed to this state. So I just want to, again, give them a shout out, because we would not have any success without our team. And I could not be more proud of these great public servants. You won't read about them every day in the paper, but and Amy was in Washington, D.C. with me when we heard Senator John Kennedy. And if you're having a boring night and you want to have a couple laughs, when Senator Kennedy bizarrely went off and started reading some crazy stuff, and she was in the fight in the foxhole with me. So I'm grateful to have her. I'm grateful for all of you. I do have to jump off, but thank you so much, and look forward to us being an ally for a very long time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I'm going to kind of piggyback on his remarks about that Senate hearing, because I think that really drives home the point that that's an example of somebody having read a couple of paragraphs in a book and finding some objectionable material and wanting to ban the entire book. And it was very frustrating as somebody that has read the two books that he read from. He read from Genderqueer and he read from All Boys Aren't Blue. Mm-hmm. And I have read those books because I was curious and I wanted to see what was causing the stir. And I was so frustrated in that moment. And if you do watch the clip later, my face in the background of the secretary is not nearly as poised as his was. During that, I was very frustrated because the portions that he was reading were about sexual assault. And of course, he didn't mention that. Of course, he just read the salacious words that get people's attention and stir up this radical group that wants to ban these books. He's taking away the experience of the author that wrote these books and of the readers that maybe are in the same position and need that support and need to see their stories reflected back to them. And that is very frustrating to me to have seen it play out in real life and on TV, and to read about it in the papers that this is what's happening. I mean, honestly, if people would read the book and have maybe a little bit of empathy and understand that books are intended to be both a window and a mirror to our own life situations, they would be less inclined to want to ban these books that are doing just that for so many people. So I know we touched on the recent threats to the libraries, but I think that's important, and I want to go back to that a little bit. I think the bomb threats started over the late summer with 1 or 2 Chicago area bomb threats made to libraries initially, which then quickly escalated and moved downstate to even include our own Illinois State Library. And I want the librarians to know that each threat has really only reinvigorated the Secretary's commitment to this bill, to our libraries, to providing those resources to the libraries going through this, that have unfortunately found themselves at the heart of the culture wars in this country right now. And not only are we investing in that with the More Than a Building campaign that the Secretary touched on, but I think we're also going to include in our legislative session a bill that I think will strengthen the ability of law enforcement to go after these threat makers, to keep our libraries safe, and to reaffirm that this will not be tolerated, that nobody deserves this. You and I talked a little bit, Ellen, about the cumulative stress that this has on libraries and librarians and living it day in and day out. And we want to be a partner to you in that. And if there are ideas that you have, if there are ways that we can make your lives a little bit easier, we want to know them at the Secretary of State's office.
That's fantastic. Oh, let's see. Oh, here's a good question. While the focus is on the uplift of public libraries, are private libraries allowed to apply for the grant?
I am going to exercise a phone a friend option. And if Greg McCormick would answer that for me in the chat, I would really appreciate that. Unfortunately, Dave, Greg, and I are all in separate buildings on the Capitol complex, or I would just run next door and get the answer from it.
Am I live? Okay, I guess I am. Okay,
yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you.
Hi, Greg.
Yes, in some instances, private libraries, depending upon the type of grant program being offered, do apply. And certainly private libraries benefit from many of the grant programs that have every year from this office through what we fund through the Consortium of Academic and Research Libraries. But we have had instances where private libraries have been allowed to apply for digitization grants in the past. The technology grant program does require the same certification.
Thank you, Greg. A couple more questions. Where and how can we look up that Senate hearing that was mentioned?
The Senate hearing was before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee on September 12th. I think it's probably still available on the Senate's webpage. I know C-SPAN also carried it live, so you can probably find it there as well. And I would not watch it in front of your children if you have any at home, but it is worth the watch.
Here's another good question. Do any of the state libraries' grants support professional development for librarians to handle banning initiatives?
Greg, can you jump back in?
Yes, so we have it, our professional development right now has been focused more on public librarianship and for the directors, nothing specific to book banning. I know that the platforms for what we fund through the Directors University with the University or with the Illinois Library Association will be being developed for next year. I'm certain that this may be part of a topic for future discussion and work for public library directors in our state.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
I think Greg is a very modest person. I also think that he's a great resource to librarians with questions about either implementing this bill to make sure that they don't miss out on grant funding or ways that they may be able to handle this challenge. I know Greg would be a great resource, and I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you. So we've got a comment from Dave Jones in the Q&A. Private libraries are always allowed to receive grants from the state archives, our ISHRAB. They are small grants, but available to anyone. Thank you, Dave. I know we see those a lot. Amy, sort of inspired by what happened this summer with Illinois' lead, are there other states who are looking into similar bills?
There are. We know for sure that Pennsylvania and New Jersey have versions of our bill that are nearly identical pending in their general assemblies. And I am rooting for them, and I am happy to share our experience and the questions that we were asked in committee more than once with anybody that we can help pass this. The more states that pass this, the better it is for all of us.
It really is. And if you take a look at the Secretary of State's website, there's a link to all the legislation and all the news coverage, and it's all just really informative for anyone who wants to look that up. I know we've had a lot of good questions. Are there other questions? Amy or Greg, is there anything you want to sort of lead us out with that you think that, we've got a lot of stuff coming up. A year from now is another election. Things that we can do to be prepared.
Run for office. I think the secretary mentioned that when people ask how they can support their local libraries. I think, and especially in smaller towns, I'm from a small town myself, and I think it's often we're trying to recruit people, any warm body will do to fill up a quorum on a library board. And it's never been more important. And if you're at all interested in the topic and what's happening and wanting to have your voice heard, run, vote. I think too often we tend to get, especially in election cycles, we tend to get really consumed with the top of the ballot, when I actually think that the decisions that more directly impact our day-to-day lives are made further down the ballot, in school board races, in library races, for city council. And I hate that those often get overlooked in the media and sometimes in our own personal lives, but that's where the decisions that most directly impact all of our lives are actually being made.
Definitely. Yeah.
And reach out to us. The secretary is a great listener. He made a point during his campaign to listen to what people impacted by this office actually want and what they actually need. So let us know where we could be more helpful. Let us know what your thoughts are. We're always interested in supporting our libraries and our archives, and anything we can do to be more helpful. We want to work with you.
The fact that we got you both tonight was thrilling. I mean, this has just been a real treat. As I said, Illinois, it's my home state. It's a great state to be a librarian in. It's a great state for the freedom to read. And we are so grateful to you and the secretary for supporting that.
It's absolutely our pleasure. I love the work you're doing, and learning more about you during this experience has been really rewarding. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So this has been recorded, and it will be sent out to anyone who signed up, and it'll be available on our webpage. And again, Amy Williams, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.